The summer of 2004 was an amazing time for games. Incredible titles like Red Dead Revolver, Chronicles of Riddick, Escape from Butcher Bay, Doom 3, Def Jam Fight for New York, and Silent Hill 4 all released in the span of a few months. Most of these games are sequels or franchise-affiliated titles, but looking back, there is one standout title among the crowd. And no, I'm not talking about the adventures of Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius Attack of the Twonkies. That's a video for another day. Today, I'm talking about Midway's physics-based shooter, Psi Ops, the Mindgate Conspiracy.
Psi Ops, the Mindgate Conspiracy.
Well then, what is so special about Psi Ops? Midway was like a Gatling gun of a studio, releasing game after game in the early 2000s, seeing what kind of shit stuck and what didn't. There are of course some bangers, like games that I've talked about before on this channel, like The Suffering and Area 51, but there's also plenty of misses, like Roadkill and Ed, Edd n Eddy The Misadventures. I'm not gonna say that NBA Ballers was bad this time, okay? A lot of people got mad at me for that last time. Psi Ops stands its ground among the bangers of Midway, in my opinion, and even takes a stand with other games releasing around that time. It's a story that may have been a little cheesy, B-movie plot heavy like Area 51 was, but it was a ton of fun. It had some goofy, over-the-top villains and some action-packed set pieces. There was some solid gameplay with an actually innovative psychic power combat system built from the ground up, and each area felt more like a puzzle to be solved rather than a shooting gallery full of cookie cutter soldiers and enemies. And it was honestly pretty addicting once you get the hang of it and start seeing what all is possible in this open, for the time environment that was more like a sandbox than it was a third-person shooter. So today I want to take some time to talk about Psi Ops and why I think it was such a good time.
Serve or die.
Psi Ops, the Mindgate Conspiracy, or just Psi Ops, as I will refer to it as for the remainder of this video, is a third-person action game where you play as a dude named Nick Scryer. Such a badass name. Nick is what they like to call a Psi operative, a dude skilled with firearms of all types, including literal firearms. See, the thing this game had going for it was its unique combination of combats involving shooting and psychic abilities, which range from pyrokinesis to mind control to simply just throwing a bitch off a ledge. Essentially, this is what Control would have looked like in 2004. Nick has had his mind wiped in order to use him as a sleeper agent to infiltrate the terrorist organization called The Movement. However, he is captured and now his low profile is super high, and now he must escape as he pieces his memory together slowly over the course of the game. He does get some help along the way from another double agent there named Sarah though. But before we get too deep, let's back up and see how this game got started. Even though when most people hear the word psychic, they may get a glimpse of sketchy palm readers or fraudulent TV show personalities, there was a time when the US military actively researched and enacted a program to create ESP-enhanced soldiers. ESP standing for extrasensory perception, like a sixth sense. Although instead of simply seeing dead people, I'm sure that these soldiers were manufactured to make a bunch of them. The government's dive into psionics has since been the subject of many sci-fi and paranormal books, shows, and movies, but Midway is one of the first to dive into psychic power military forces as the subject of a video game. In fact, every ability in this game is an actually researched theory by militaries across the globe. Everything from mind control to remote viewing and beyond. Midway was able to find documentation and research from real military organizations studying these concepts. The game was initially titled ESPionage, like ESPionage, like
I see dead.
You get it. Luckily, it wasn't named that in the end. The team felt that the name focused on the ESP aspect of the game, but not the actual psionic abilities of this soldier. So Psi Ops ended up being a much better fit. One of Brian Eddy's favorite rejected names for the game was Psypocolypse, which I actually think would have been a pretty good name, honestly. Since the initial idea of the game was focused solely on these powers in the game, it makes sense that all the time and effort of the studio, led by the game's producer Brian Brian Eddy went into showcasing these new abilities, just seeing if they can even pull off the interactive idea of remote viewing an area or controlling something like telekinesis. It may seem silly to discuss it now, but it was pretty untreaded territory back in 2004. 3D movies were created that illustrated each proposed power, as well as the motions and overall feel that the designers were going for, as it's a topic that could easily become convoluted when trying to explain it to a developer. For example, the telekinesis power showed off the idea of picking up and throwing objects as well as people, slamming them into walls, leaving gruesome splatters of blood. With these 3D movies made up and a solid concept for the game in hand, management at Midway had no choice but to say, yeah, you know what, that sounds pretty dope, and they greenlit the project, and the rest is history. Except not really. Making this game turned out to be a big pain in the tuchus. Since this sort of concept didn't really exist in games yet, everything was being made from scratch, including the engine that runs the whole shebang and the development tools necessary to code and design psionic abilities. While all other games at the time built on existing engines and tools stared in the face of Midway, taunting them before the competition of an open market even started. And of course, like nearly every game's development cycle ever, there was a massive time crunch that limited the polish that this team wanted to add to every aspect of the game. Luckily, Midway was sort of cool with actually putting out quality stuff and extended the time on development for Psi Ops instead of just shoving some junk out the door. So with some more time, the team doubled down on getting bugs out of their engine, improving the graphics as well as the fluidity of the gameplay. In this process, however, the game was scrapped as an option for the GameCube, one of the consoles that they showed off on at E3. But I think it's for the better. The game was still released on the PC, the PS2, and the Xbox, and it executed everything that it wanted to. This is one of the rare occasions development favored creative minds rather than fat cat pockets, and I think we got a really solid game as a result of that. As for what makes the game so solid, that'd be the gameplay.
I went into the lead programmer's office and I found him throwing a ragdoll repeatedly against the wall and giggling to himself. Then we knew we had a good game.
The game on paper is a third-person shooter, but instead of focusing on the gunplay, the game puts all its eggs in one basket, and that basket is the psionic abilities and their interactions with the great physics-based engine. In short, the guns feel pretty terrible. They don't hit super hard, and they become absolutely useless in certain portions of the game. And while I think they obviously could have made the guns more satisfying to use in the long run, it's a great decision to put such a big focus on the psionic powers, as that's the whole reason that this game even exists. I didn't even use the weapons unless needed. I would just throw people and then kick them to death in an effort to save ammunition, or just toss them off a ledge. This game has kind of a slow roll into the psionic abilities. You start the first level with none at all, but eventually they are introduced one at a time along the course of the game as Nick slowly gets his memory back, getting flashbacks to his training sessions where he learned them all, giving you an integrated tutorial of sorts to see the ins and outs of a certain ability, all taught by this rad ass dude who has a different hairstyle every time you see him. I loved it. However, these training sessions are also really morbid when you actually think about them. These are trained staff that you are practicing your abilities on, and at first you think, okay, they're just gonna get bumped and bruised, but nah, these guys are getting straight up murked, all while your trainer mocks them.
Oh, that's gotta hurt.
And the subject of being paid test subjects comes up more than once.
Don't worry, these guys get well paid.
Jesus, this must be how Amazon enters the paramilitary market in the future. The first ability unlocked is telekinesis, or TK, the bread and butter of the game. You can move objects of all sizes, whether it be throwing crates at enemies or grabbing some ammo from a tall shelf. You can also pick up enemies themselves and toss them off a ledge, or slam them into the ground or a wall, or you can just hold them up in the air and blast them with your gun. Or you can walk them around and throw them into environmental hazards like a furnace if you're feeling a little spicy. There's even some more advanced techniques like TK surfing, when you're controlling an object that Nick is currently standing on to surf around. Unfortunately, this isn't really utilized that much in the game. TK is still so satisfying to use. It's reactive and it's intuitive, and I really gotta hand it to the game's engine designer because it's honestly the thing that really makes this game. combined with the Havoc 2.0 ragdoll physics, it's just perfect. Unfortunately, each ability is not as useful or as badass as TK. The next one unlocked is Remote Viewing, or RV. It gives Nick an out-of-body perception, allowing his mind to wander halls, through walls, and locked doors. It's a really neat concept, but I rarely found myself using it outside of puzzles and areas where it's really necessary to advance. Mind Drained, or MD, is a way to use the enemy's mind as fuel for your own psychic abilities. You have mental energy that is depleted every time you use an ability, and while there's items that replenish your energy, they aren't always available where enemies with intact brains are aplenty. Using stealth, you can mind drain a live enemy, granting you a good amount of energy, resulting in their head popping into a pink mess. But you can also use it on dead enemies for a small amount of energy, that is, as long as they still have a head intact. Mind Control, or MC, is the ability that I probably use the most other than TK. It's just really fun to use as a way to mix up combat and make things a little more interesting. Essentially, you just hop into another person's mind and get control of their body. You can make them hit switches that open gates that you can't reach, you can attack other enemies from a different angle, or simply make them kill themselves. It's a really good way to approach different situations, and it was always a lot of fun. Pyrokinesis, or PK, lets Nick blast a wave of fire from the swing of an arm. This ability, while it sounds really cool, it kind of sucked. It's a single straight line cone that burns enemies or explodes barrels in the way, but it has no verticality to it. You can't really aim up or down, and the range of it is really short, and by the time you're in range to use it, you're better off using guns or just TK to throw shit at them. It's a novel concept, but a dud in my eyes. The last ability is called Aura View, or AV, and it's pretty fucking stupid. It allows Nick to view into a new spectrum and see things not visible before. You can see erased messages that were on whiteboards, you can see invisible traps and mines, and a new type of enemy introduced just to give this ability a reason to be used: Aura Beasts. While this game starts out really fun, after the first couple levels of the game, it starts to lose some luster. There's a portion of this game where the enemies are immune to telekinesis and pretty much all the psionic powers, except fire. Combine that with them being in a level designed with a severe lack of throwable objects, and you get a level that strips really all the fun from the gameplay, and it gives you these bullet sponge enemies in return to shoot at with your guns that feel as hard hitting as Nerf blasters. After this upsetting turn of events, you are then introduced to invisible flying monsters that you have a dedicated psionic ability unlocked to see the fuckers. And while you're using the Aura View to see them, you can't use other abilities like telekinesis or pyrokinesis, so you're left with shooting them, which isn't so bad. But in this same level, you need to use telekinesis to move objects through the level, meaning you can't use your Aura View, meaning you're essentially walking blind into this horde of invisible naked mole rat looking fucks, and it makes for a truly miserable time. I enjoyed the bullet sponges and power armor far more than these things. I just don't get why they shoehorn these creatures into the game. In my mind, they did it because the Aura View is pretty non-eventful, allowing you to see hidden messages and traps and stuff, but overall it would have been a forgotten ability, and we can't have two of those. Remote viewing. So some overly caffeinated dweeb on the design floor probably suggested some invisible resource depleting monsters that exist only in this restricted view that are there for the sole reason of annoying the player. Hey, fuck you, guy. After this though, you get some more cheesy bosses and bullet sponge enemies, and it really makes you kind of enjoy this game a little bit again. There's also a mini-game unlockable part of this game that really showcases what the psionic abilities of the game could have been. You played with more inventive ways of using telekinesis like pool or bowling, and even more involved platforming sections that involved the TK surfing. It's all good fun, and it showed the potential of these innovative ideas. Overall, the gameplay was very good. The beginning hour or two was genius, and the first two boss fights were absolutely stellar. But there are some low points as well that were really quite stinky. But I don't think that they take away too much from the game, even though it left a sour note right at the end of the game. It's like finishing a bomb-ass serving of french fries, only for your last fry to be one of those brown, weird-tasting bits. I do want to talk about the boss fights though, because I feel like it's been a while since I've played a game that has nice, individually themed boss fights based on unique themes and characteristics. But also, I've been playing a lot of 50 cent shoot 'em up games lately, so maybe there's that. You see, Nick Scryer is a sort of fancy boy. He can use all the cool ass psionic abilities, but every other person in this world cannot. Each boss fight in the game has Nick fighting against the master of a specific ability, and they are sure to explain exactly what they do in an excessively descriptive monologue before the fight.
I'm not too fond of getting my hands dirty. Instead, I take over the minds of others. They do everything I say, like good little puppets.
Like I said, B-movie heavy plot. The first boss is Jov Levanov, the master of mind control. He controls an army of puppets that do his dirty work and even see for him since he ain't got no eyeballs to do it for himself. This fight is essentially stopping his horde of soldiers that spawn indefinitely from these human receptacles by destroying said spawn points. Every once in a while, Jove will cause a soldier to become a suicide bomber, running at Nick as the bomb takes down, and you have to use TK to throw these explosive fucks into one of the spawn points, and boom, it's no more. After killing all the soldiers, Jove hops down and fights Nick himself with some flashy projectiles, as well as using mind control on him, making all your controls work backwards, which was actually pretty frustrating to deal with. There's no gimmick in this second part though, you just shoot at him or throw shit at him until he's dead. And even though you defeat him at the end of the fight, it just results in him picking Nick up, using mind control on him to make him kill himself, all before forgetting about the bomb placed at his feet, blowing himself up before he can get Nick to pull the trigger. The second boss fight was my favorite fight, Edgar Barrett, the boss of telekinesis. There wasn't really any gimmick to this fight, but it was a lot of fun just tossing shit back and forth with him until one of us died. Even though he can throw substantially heavier shit. Dude moves the moon at one point in the game. And if you got close to him, he had this shockwave type attack that fucks you up, but it still ends up in a really fun fight overall. And like Jove, even though you depleted his health bar, the fight still ends with Nick essentially losing the fight. Although instead of just trying to kill Nick, Barrett just throws him to the ground and knocks him out and leaves.
The offer is still open.
The third boss is Wei Lu, the Master of Illusion. This is a Psi ability that Nick himself does not have. In fact, I think Wei Lu is the only one ever that can use it. This fight was okay. The first round was easy enough. Wei Lu controls these statues that you have to use fire on and then throw objects at them in order to destroy them. It's easy enough. But then this innocent looking lass here transforms into this bitch. A giant green monster with 3 snake heads that spit acid at you. And she has 3 fucking health bars. Luckily you don't have to be precise and hit each head individually, as attacking the main body seems to lower all 3 health bars simultaneously. Even though hitting them in the head does a lot more damage per health bar. At least when you finish this fight, the boss is actually dying and not in the process of killing Nick anyway.
I see your
True self. You feel your bust.
You fear your destiny.
Next up is Marlena Kessler, the Master of Pyrokinesis. She is definitely the most Saturday morning cartoon-esque boss.
Do you like playing with fire?
She's just super cheesy with the fire puns, but her fight is pretty okay. The first phase involves destroying a giant machine that she is latched into, all while dodging energy blasts and fiery lasers that shoot out at you. You have to throw these coolant cylinders at a precise point on the machine in order to shut it down, and after doing that, Marlena hops down and fights Nick mano-a-mano with her advanced fire moves and shitty one-liners. Again, you simply just bombard her with coolant cylinders until she's extinguished. The fifth boss is Nicholas Wrightson, the Master of Remote Viewing. And while this fight was not that great, I love this guy's design. He reminded me of an enemy that could have been from The Suffering or something. His voice acting was well done to fit that as well. And I love how he does this long speech before the fight and Nick just points at him and goes, "You're insane."
You're insane.
Not acknowledging anything that this dude said at all. It's also a unique fight as it only has one phase. All you need to do is to destroy the monitors all around Wrightson while dodging laser attacks and aura beasts. While his character's theme is well surrounded around remote viewing, nothing about this fight really points to that fact. I guess it'd be kinda hard to convey that in combat since it isn't really a combat skill, but maybe he should have been the aura view master or something. I don't know. Anyways, once you beat him in the fight, the aura beasts all maul him to death while they all disappear into another realm.
I can see the other side. It's beautiful.
The final boss of the game is of course the General. After the General becomes an all-powerful god with the help of the Monolith, he has crazy powerful Psi abilities that he uses to brawl with Nick. He can throw rocks, use energy blasts, and shoot flames, and it makes for a decent enough fight, if not a little lackluster for a final boss fight. And Nick doesn't even get the satisfaction of killing the General, as a black hole forms from his overuse of power and sucks him up into another dimension, or who knows? Because the game ends on a damn cliffhanger. Speaking of which, I guess we should run down the general plot of the game real quick. The plot of Psi Ops is two things off the rip. Cheesy as hell, as you just saw going over the bosses of the game, and very cutscene heavy. Before the game starts, you go through like 10 minutes of cutscenes just to get a little background. But anyway, let's dive into the story. The game opens with the protagonist, Nick Scryer, tied to a chair being pumped with drugs, and people all around him discuss that he is a Psi operative in a secret organization called Mindgate that experiments with Psi powers in a military setting. These drugs that Nick is receiving results in his mind being erased. During a battle, Nick is captured by a terrorist group called the Movement, and it is revealed to him by another double agent inside the Movement named Sarah Blake that the whole point of getting his mind erased was to allow him to infiltrate and take down this organization. She gives him a gun and tells him to escape the armed guards and meet her in a supply room where she gives him a drug that helps him get his memory back slowly over time. But immediately he gets the memory of a single training session of him learning telekinesis, allowing him to use that power now. Nick continues to search this facility in an attempt to save his men that were captured with him, even though they are being processed to be meat puppets under the control of Jove Levinov. He does find one of his friends and think he saves him, but he is forced to kill him as he attacks, leaving the front of his face slapped on the ground like a damn piece of bologna. This makes Nick commit to destroying the base. In the process of doing so, he fights with Levinov, and we all know how that goes. Bombs go off, Nick confronts the General in the destruction, where he lets slip that he's the one who trained Nick before flying off, and then Sarah swoops in and pulls Nick out as well. Nick and Sarah arrive at some base on an island coast that is run by Barrett, the big telekinesis man, and also the General's right-hand man. Nick struggles through waves of meat puppet guards, and Sarah explains to Nick a little about the General. He did work for Mindgate and he did train Nick, but he fled once he started doing things like trying to give himself psionic powers in less than ethical ways. And he started this organization called the Movement in order to get powers once and for all. At this base, they also find an artifact called Luna 1. They don't know what it does, but since it's highly protected, they know that it's important to the Movement's operations. Sarah also reveals why she is here helping Nick. It's because her sister fled Mindgate with the General when he left, and she hasn't seen her alive ever since. Shortly after this, Sarah offers to take Luna 1 off of Nick while he goes on to fight Barrett, although she's acting much more different than usual. And after confronting Barrett, Sarah comes out and shows her allegiance with him, giving Luna 1 back to the control of the Movement, betraying Nick. Nick and Barrett duke it out before Barrett flees and Nick follows in a helicopter, leaving a sad Sarah behind. Nick eventually gets voice comms from an unknown ally, giving him coordinates to a hidden base in the middle of Hong Kong. He finds this ally, another double agent named Kimiko, who has turned against the Movement due to her seeing the evil that they are. She is the one who has been researching an ancient artifact called the Monolith that can grant extreme power. The General has been chasing this artifact in order to get his own psionic abilities. Luna 1 from the island is just one part of this artifact. The Monolith is also revealed to have been the subject of many conflicts over the course of history, including World War II. Kimiko becomes Nick's new ally in the field, as Sarah has now switched sides apparently. Before he goes forward into battle, she warns him of Wei Lu, the illusionist that is responsible for hiding the base. She fucks with him a little bit as he makes his way through the base, causing trippy illusions, kind of like Scarecrow does to Batman in the Arkham games, transporting Nick to a cemetery full of people that he's killed that all crawl out from the ground and attack him. After escaping his nightmare, Nick confronts Wei Lu and defeats her, breaking the illusion on the Hong Kong base, revealing it to Mindgate and allowing them to take it over. While escaping the base, Nick runs into Sarah, and he's all like, "What the fuck, I can't trust you," and she's like, "What the fuck you talking about?" Before he almost shoots her in the face, she gives him a key card and she leaves. Nick then runs into Marlena and the General talking about activating a machine that fuses parts of the monolith together using the pyrokinesis of Marlena. Marlena is able to fuse the artifact, but she overloads the machine, and the General takes the monolith and flees, leaving Marlena and Nick to duke it out, causing the base to melt down in the process. After defeating Marlena, Kimiko calls to say that she's staying in the reactor control to stop the blast from destroying the whole city, killing herself in the process. She pleads with Nick to chase the General down and stop him, even though he wants to come save her. Choosing not to let her death be in vain, he chases down the General to the rooftop, trying to shoot him out of his jet, but he fails, and then he ends up just chasing him to a base in the Himalayan mountains. Nick arrives at a temple, and after killing a guard, he talks to its reanimated corpse controlled by a man named Wrightson, a spy that Nick knew from back in the day at Mindgate. Nick unlocks Aura View here as well and fights interdimensional beasts as he makes his way through the temple. He finds Sarah locked in a cell right before she gets attacked by one of these beasts, but it's okay though, she just gets knocked out and she wakes up a little bit after to find Nick possessed by Wrightson, and one of the goofiest jump scares that I've ever seen. Just look at that face. Nick eventually snaps out of it and talks with Sarah about stopping the General. He still doesn't trust her at all, but he really has no choice but to work with her. He continues crawling through the temple in pursuit of the General. He keeps encountering Wrightson in control of some random bodies, and he clearly gets tired of him continuously monologuing.
From beyond our dimension and
Nick meets with Sarah and they get ambushed by Sarah? No, this is Tanya, Sarah's sister, her twin sister, the one that really betrayed Nick. Sarah has been innocent all along. Tanya reveals she committed her life to Mindgate because they brought them both in when their parents died. She then shoots Nick before Wrightson takes over Sarah's body and both the sisters leave. Nick goes on to confront Wrightson, killing him and ridding the world of these terrible aura beasts. He finds Sarah waking up from her mind control and they split ways again. Sarah to go look for her sister and Nick to finish things up with the General. Nick then runs into Barrett. They get into a telekinesis tussle before he moves along to enact the final process of the movement. And the gang's all here. Nick, the General, Barrett, even evil sister Tanya shows up to put the final shot into Nick, right before Sarah ruthlessly headshots her with one of the goofiest lines to follow it up.
Mom always did like me best, bitch.
The General and Barrett then start the monolith process. Barrett even moves the fucking moon into the right position to power the monolith. Right after this, the General kills Barrett because
But true power is not meant to be shared.
this starts the final battle of the game. Defeating the General causes a black hole to form from his overuse of power, ripping him into another dimension as he screams out Scryer's name into the void. Nick grabs the monolith and vows to let no one else unlock its power again. Right before some black choppers show up and Nick screams out, "That's not help, I remember everything now."
No one will ever unlock the power of the monolith again.
Looks like we have help.
That's no help. I remember everything now.
Before destroying one of the helicopters and leaving us with a to be continued screen. Yep, shit ends on a cliffhanger. What the fuck did you remember, Nick? Couldn't you just say who it was in the helicopter? We will never know. That's how the game ends, and we never got a sequel. Yep. Even though this game was received very well at the time of release and even named as PS2 Game of the Year by GameStop, we never see a sequel to Psi Ops. And obviously there were plans for one, given the fucking cliffhanger ending. According to developers, they never even finished the script idea for a follow-up because Midway never gave them the thumbs up, which just blows my mind because Psi Ops was on par or better than Area 51 and The Suffering, yet it was left behind while both of those games received follow-ups. There are some ideas they had floating around about what to do, such as adding new powers to give Nick, as well as expanding on the capabilities of the existing ones. They wanted to introduce more variety of gameplay with vehicles, bigger, more interactive and destructible worlds, and smarter enemies, but again, they never had anything concrete on paper, so the information there is just scarce. A good portion of the Psi Ops team went to work on John Woo's Stranglehold, where you can see some of the elements of destructible environments that they may have had that in mind. Another setback to a potential sequel came in the form of a lawsuit in 2007. Screenwriter William L. Crawford III claimed that Midway took the game's story from one of his screenplays. Even the titles were similar, supposedly. The courts eventually tossed out the case because the two things never actually shared any relation. However, this most likely stalled production on a sequel if there was any, and just 2 years later, Midway went bottoms up, cementing the game to being an only child. Many Midway assets were sold off to Warner Bros. Psi Ops is confirmed to be one of those IPs among hundreds of others, and with all of those IPs and countless others under the umbrella of Warner Bros., it's exceedingly unlikely that we will ever see a follow-up to this game, or even a remake or remaster for that matter. But it is never impossible. Psi Ops could have been made into a fantastic franchise, competing with similar games in the future like Infamous and those Star Wars games where you can use the Force. But unfortunately, we will most likely never see the potential this game universe could have held. We could have seen flashbacks to the wars over artifacts like World War II with Psi operatives, which included America and Russia's race to the moon to see Luna 1 for the first time. We could have seen which big organization was chasing Nick at the end there, even though black helicopters typically point in one direction. But most likely we will see nothing, and that's a shame. If you can get your hands on the game, I highly recommend it. It's a great playthrough, and the goofy plot and dialogue is really quite enjoyable. There was a free version floating around for the PC, but I can almost guarantee that all links to it are dead. However, there is always the Johnny Depp way.
I'm Captain Jack Sparrow. Savvy?
I'd like to take this time to thank my patrons, my dude Doc Schwinn, Kid Kingpin, Anonymous Starkweather, Doug Smith, Sofa Pals Productions, Crash Bandicoot 25, Zachary Parkerson, Potty, and Yay Man. Zachary Parkerson is also the one responsible for recommending this video on the game in the Patreon, so I have to thank him especially for bringing it to my attention. As always, thank you for watching. I do hope to see you next time. Peace.